everyone. I am Lexi. I am your host for Lexi's Book Nook, the podcast of all about books, book club recommendations, Reese Witherspoon book picks, and books on my TBR list. So if you are a regular listener, you know that this podcast is on Spotify and on BookTube as well. If you are watching me, you might be watching me on BookTube or on Patreon as well. This podcast, I will be going over the books that I reviewed in the beginning of the month in the previous episode on May 1st. So I will go over all the books that I've read, but in this episode, I have read all of them. And I'm going to go over like a little summary, my thoughts, ratings, and review, and a few discussion questions as if this is a mock book club. So you can use all these books for your own book club if you want to start one, if you're already part of one and you want to give your own recommendations, or you're looking to start one yourself. So we were going to go over all these books. So if you're listening to Spotify, this is the second episode of the month. If you are a listener on Patreon, you're supporting this podcast. Thank you so much. For $3 a month, you can see my face. You can see my book note, get inspiration for your own. You can see the book titles, all for $3 a month. If you do not want to pay, that is fine. I also have a BookTube as well. So that means YouTube, all about books, where you can see my face and all those benefits right there. On YouTube or my BookTube, I also have bonus episodes, little pop-up episodes. Patreon users also get that choice as well. And those are usually books that go beyond the TBR list of what I'm doing here on this podcast episode. So check those out. I have multiple platforms. I also have an Instagram called Lexi's Book Nook, and I'll do my little picture and little blurb of a review. I also have a website called Lexi's Book Nook where you can access all of these except the discussion questions, but you can also purchase the books on my website on the bookshop tab. You can use my Amazon link to buy your own copies. I will make a sale I get a little commission off your sale, but at no extra cost to you. So without further ado, we're going to go into the episode. I am going to go over all the books that I've read. I do not have one of the books because it was overdue at the library, so I will have a picture of that. But if you are on BookTube and Patreon, you can see my little stack over here. I didn't get through as many books as I wanted to, but the first one that I'll be going over is The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. This was my Cockeysville book club pick. I actually recommended it. So that is that one. I think there might have been another one for my Bel Air book club book, but I'm going to go in order. The next book is From Scratch. This is a Reese Witherspoon pick. But it's also, I think it was last year's. I will tend to do Reese Witherspoon picks from the year prior and try to get to Reese's most recent recommendation if I can get access to it in a timely manner, but I did not get the latest one. Have you heard about Kitty Carr? I do not have that one. The next one, I'm going to pull up a picture of it. It's going to be the Dictionary of Lost Words. Let me pull up a picture if I can. So I will have little pictures on my phone if I do not have the book. Bear with me with any glares that you might see. I also read The House of Eve, which is a Reese Witherspoon pick, but that was the pick for February of this year, so we're not going to go into that today, but I did read another Reese pick, and that was that. The next book after those two, sorry Spotify users, you should get a Patreon or BookTube account, is The Red Lotus by Chris Bojalian. So that is the third pick. Fourth is something I got from an ex-boyfriend, but I read it anyway, called The Magnolia Palace by Fiona Davis. And then the last pick of the month is Killers of the Flower Moon by David Grann. So I hope you noticed that there is a theme for this month. If you've heard of the saying, April showers bring May flowers, we are reading books that have flowers in the title. So that is what we are going over today. I'm going to go into The Marriage Portrait first, and I do have all my scripts on my phone, so bear with me. So I'm going to go over like a little summary, my thoughts on the book, and then just 3 discussion questions only. I don't want to keep this podcast too long, but that way you can get like some sample discussion questions for your book club. The other book I just remembered was The Christie Affair. And I do have a picture of that. So I'm going back and forth. This is what happens when I don't have all the books on me. But I've already read this, so I probably don't have it on me. But it's The Christie Affair by Nina de Gramont. It is French. I don't know if I pronounced it correctly. I'm not much of a French speaker, but there we go. So that is another book. I'm going to go over that after the marriage portrait. So I'm going a little bit out of order. So I'm sorry if I am confusing anybody. But we are going to talk about the marriage portrait first, which contains two timelines. The first one begins with 16-year-old Lucrezia de' Medici at the Fortezza, a remote rural retreat in 1561. Her husband, Alfonso II, the Duke of Ferrara, took her there. The second timeline begins in the Medici Palazzo in Florence in 1544 at the time of Lucrezia's conception. In the first timeline, Alfonso pretends that he brought ill Lucrezia to Fortezza to recover from her latest illness. However, Lucrezia senses that he wishes to kill her. ... So we are going to just end there. I don't want to give up much, but it's a lot of back and forth with Lucrezia, whether if her husband's going to kill her or not. And we go into flashbacks of how she was raised and what the events leading up to the time where she's taken to the Fortezza. So my thoughts. I love learning about the Medici family personally. Since my first trip to Italy, I was fascinated with Italian culture. Being 50% Italian, I am proud of my heritage and wanted to learn as much as possible about Italy. After that first trip, the second one I visited a boyfriend at the time, but that first trip, I enjoyed reading about the Medici family and even watching the TV show The Medici. This book was fascinating and I thoroughly enjoyed it, but now I want to rewatch the TV show because I am wondering how accurate it is and how those events line up. So 3 discussion questions. The first one is, from the start, Lucrezia's temperament is difficult for her mother to tolerate. Are Lucrezia's intellect and willfulness a liability or a benefit in shaping the course of her life? Lucrezia's intellect and willfulness is more of a liability than anything, in my opinion. It brings trouble with her mom, among other people. Back in medieval times, and even after that, women were not expected or desired to have a say in anything political. In fact, it was frowned upon. Lucrezia's mother and father's relationship is quite rare, in which Cosimo allowed his wife to be a part of the going-ons around the castle. Although Lucrezia is intelligent and very capable of making these decisions, we see that it only brings her trouble in the days to come, especially around her husband, Alfonso. I have a lot of typos in my script. Good thing you can't see that. The second question, what distinctions did you notice between the ways girls and boys were raised in Cosimo's household? To what extent are Lucrezia and her siblings permitted to experience childhood innocence? Lucrezia's brothers were trained in physical classes, politics, and were math and sciences compared to her and her sisters. Her brothers were expected to rule once they come of age, so Cosimo made sure that they would be well educated when the time comes. As opposed to that, Lucrezia and her sisters were taught languages like her brothers, but more emphasis on the arts. Despite being well educated, I don't think that any of the children were able to fully experience childhood and innocence. And as the third question, as you read the story of the tigress, what parallels did you see between the entrapment of trophy animals and the Duke's request to preserve and expand his dynasty? And I thought this was a very interesting question. I didn't know the scratch marks on the title had anything to do with the story until the tiger came up. So if you want to look at the title again, there are these orange stripes across it. And I didn't understand what that meant, or that if her marriage portrait, like the portrait that Alfonso had her painted for, was scratched or torn or destroyed for a certain reason, but it really had to do with how this tiger was integrated into the story. So even then I didn't know how the tiger fit in, but it's really Lucrezia interacts with this tiger that her father brought into Italy, into his palace, and Lucrezia was just entranced by this tiger and her entrapment with her family. So that goes into the parallel. So between the tiger and Lucrezia, the parallel is when she was married and living with Alfonso, she was treated similarly to the tiger entrapped. Lucrezia was like a trophy wife to Alfonso, beautiful but powerless. He did his best to suppress her energy and intellect and created boundaries for her. Alfonso tried to preserve Lucrezia's health to create an heir and nothing else. Lucrezia had no other purpose to him. So I thought that was super interesting. So, sorry, 1 second. So those are all the discussion questions for the marriage portrait. We are going to finish up the book with that, and we're going to go into the Christie affair. So I'm bringing up that script right now. Bear with me. Oh, I already have it over here, basically. I just don't have it very in-depth. But the Christie affair. In 1925, Miss Nana Dea infiltrated the wealthy, rarefied world of author Agatha Christie and her husband Archie. In every way, she became a part of their life. First with Christie's, then just Archie. Soon, Nan became Archie's mistress, luring him away from his devoted wife, desperate to marry him. Nan's plot didn't begin the day she met Archie and Agatha. And decades before, in Ireland, when Nan was just a young girl, she and the man she loved were a star-crossed couple, yes, who were destined to be together until the Great War, a pandemic and shameful secrets that tore them apart. Then acts of unspeakable cruelty kept them separated. This novel details the horrific conditions and treatments at the Magdalene laundries in Ireland. And then there are some questions, like what drives someone to murder? What will someone do in the name of love? What kind of crime can someone never forgive? So I thought I had a script for my thoughts on this, but I already have it on my website. I'm not going to pull it up, but I really did like this book because I didn't know anything about Agatha Christie except for a couple of books, and they're like murder mysteries if you haven't read any of them, and they're like intriguing. I'm not a big mystery person, but I do like thrillers, so like it has a little bit of aspect of thrillers, but I've only read 2 Agatha Christie's books in my life. So then this book came out, and it was Reese Witherspoon pick, so I knew it was going to be good because I love her recommendations. And it was very interesting because I didn't know that Agatha Christie actually disappeared for 11 days and that there was such a mystery behind it. And then to have the perspective around the mistress was just very interesting. Her backstory isn't really related to Agatha at all, so if you really love Agatha Christie, she's not a huge part of this book. It's not about her, but rather about Nan, the mistress. But I thought it was really interesting. I really liked it. But I know like some people from my Cockeysville book club, they weren't a big fan that Agatha wasn't very involved in the book. So those are my thoughts. I really liked it. But there's been many books and film versions about Agatha Christie's 11-day disappearance. Why does it still hold such interest to the public? Where do you think she was during the time, and what were the motivations behind her real-life disappearance? And I think the reason why it still holds an interest is because of the curiosity, mystery, and intrigue about Agatha due to her rise in fame. But my thoughts were maybe the motivations were because maybe she had a nervous breakdown brought on by the death of her mother and embarrassed of her husband's affair, or maybe she was trying to pull a stunt to bring her fame into the light. It could be anything, but I don't really know, of course. Only Agatha knows. But it's not a true story. This story is not true. So why do you think the author Nona de Gramont decided to focus her novel on Archie's mistress and also completely change her backstory? And I think this is just a very brief question, but I think it just adds depth to the story, and to make this book a historical fiction, not to put on facts, but just add a different element and try to bring readers in and get the intrigue in about the mistress. Then the next question is, in what ways was she an unreliable narrator? And we're talking about Nan, the mistress. And I think it's because she's supposed to be an imperfect model, an imperfect person as being the mistress. But I noticed this, that she, Nan, confesses that her account of Agatha's days are speculative, but as reliable an account as you can ever hope to receive. So she confesses that she's not going to be reliable, and she's only going to say what she knows about it, which is not much. So I think it was meant to be a mystery, and that no one will ever truly know. But those are just a couple of questions that I found for the Christie affair. So we're going to go into From Scratch next. I'm going to pull up the script for that. And I need to go into my flag mailbox. So if you need the title again, here it is, From Scratch. It's super cute. It has been adapted to a Netflix flick, I think, which I definitely am going to read because I love book to movie adaptations. So most of the TBR books are going to be those kind of books, but mostly like books that are going to be in theme for the month. But From Scratch is a love memoir. It's about Tenby, an American woman from Texas. She moved to Florence, Italy to study sculpting and art. A young Sicilian man, Saro, stumbles upon her on the elegant streets of Italy. Saro was a chef who showed his artistic individuality through his cooking. After several encounters, the two fall in love. From Scratch is about Tenby and Saro's love story. And I loved this book. It was so cute. So I mentioned I went to Italy the first time to visit a boyfriend. I went the second time with my family. And that was for a vacation. Both times I fell in love with Italy. I love the food, the culture, the language, and everything in between. And so this book made me really miss Italy. I fell in love with Italy all over again reading this book. It starts off really sad, but it gets better throughout the book. The book is about love and death, grief, forgiveness, and family. And it's just very, very touching and special and magical. So it was great. And the food that they mentioned sounds absolutely delicious. Every Sunday, I make authentic Italian food from a cookbook. So I learned how to make pasta by scratch. So I make these dishes, but I'm printed out all the recipes at the end of the book. So if you want this book just for the recipes, highly recommend it. It's on my website. I just don't know how anybody can dislike this book in any way, but I loved it. So discussion questions. Discuss how the book's structure shapes your understanding of Tenby's story. How do the flashbacks inform her emotional journey as a widow? Why do you think she chose to write her memoir in this way? Every other chapter is written in past, with the other chapters taking place in present time. The book starts with Saro's death, but future chapters in past tense about Tenby's and Saro's love story and how it evolved. The other chapters took place in the present after Saro's death. Those chapters start after Saro's death and onwards, like in the future. These flashbacks show Tenby's emotional journey starting at bereavement, grief, anger, acceptance, peace, then maturity. Throughout the present chapters, I see Tenby becoming more mature and more accepting of Saro's death. She's still sad, and she mentions that she struggles, but I get hints of hope in later chapters. This involvement shows Tenby wanting to move on with her life, but still loves and remembers Saro. So the second question. Tenby acknowledges that her decision to travel to Sicily so soon after Saro's death goes against conventional wisdom. Why do you think she decides to go? If you were in her shoes, would you have done the same? And I think Tenby decides to go to Italy so soon is to be exposed to everything related to Saro, his heritage, culture, food, and family. She wasn't ready to let him go so quickly. She wanted to immerse herself in him as much as possible while his memory is still fresh to her. And I think part of her wanted to be close to Saro's family, to be there for them. Tenby comes from a very close family and is family-oriented, so I'm sure she wanted to support her mother-in-law. But if I were in Tenby's shoes, I wouldn't have gone to Sicily so soon after my partner's death. It would be way too painful and sad. I would need some time to heal before immersing myself in all things related to my potential husband and family. But that's just me. I don't think I would go so soon. How does Nona and Tenby's relationship evolve over the 3 summers depicted in the book? What are the major turning points that bring them closer? Nona and Tenby become closer and closer throughout the book. Tenby is almost like another daughter to Nona near the end of the book, and I think Saro's death brought the two closer because Saro was in the center of both of their lives as son and husband, respectively. There were no 2 other people closer to him that loved him so much. And other than Saro's death, I think Nona's husband's death also brought her closer to Tenby. Now alone, Nona relied on her family even more. Tenby, being family-oriented and needing to hold on to someone too, started visiting Sicily every summer to visit Nona. So those are all the questions for From Scratch. There's some sample questions. Again, that book is on lexisbooknook.com if you want to buy your own copy. We're going to go into the next book. Let me see if I can pull up my script for that, which is the Red Lotus. So this is chosen after like a nickname for the plague. Interesting. The Red Lotus is the plague, obviously. But this book is a story about deceit. Austin, an American man, vanishes on a rural road in Vietnam. His girlfriend Alexis is an emergency room doctor who is trained to ask questions. She follows a path that leads her home to the hospital where they had met. Alexis and Austin met in the emergency room where she sutured a bullet wound in Austin's arm. 6 months later, close to falling in love, they travel to Vietnam on a bike tour so that Austin can show her his passion for cycling and so he can pay his respects to the place where his father and uncle fought in the war. But as Alexis waits at the hotel for him to return from his solo ride, she is told that Austin vanishes into thin air. The only clue he leaves behind is an energy gel dropped on the road. As Alexis grapples with this loss, deals with the FBI, Austin's prickly family, and her colleagues at the hospital, Alexis uncovers a series of strange lies and forces her to wonder, where did Austin go? Why did he really want to go to Vietnam? And how much danger is he in? But this was an interesting thriller. If you like Robin Cook books, like medical thrillers, then you like this one. It's one of those medical pandemic / thriller books. It kept me on my toes and wanting to find out more about the plague and how it started. Not like the plague, not like the Black Plague, but like a different, like more modern plague. Because it came from like a chemical reaction, chemical addition to the energy gel that was the only sign of Austin when he disappeared. However, the believability of the story was a little questionable for me. Alexis and Austin were dating for only 6 months before Austin disappeared. They weren't in love, but on the brink of it. I think it's hardly believable, not highly, hardly believable for a girl barely in love to pursue her boyfriend's disappearance to the degree that Alexis did. She was very in-depth and very passionate about finding out what happened to him, despite admitting that she did love him. Overall, the plot was good, but it would have made more sense if it were one or both of Austin's parents, or even a close friend to pursue his disappearance, or Alexis and Austin were like seriously dating or married or engaged or whatever, but not like a girl who barely knows him. However, it wasn't Alexis. If it wasn't going to be Alexis that pursued him, then the story wouldn't question the theme in love and deceit. So that's why I gave this book 4 at the most. But the first question is, Alexis' work as an emergency room doctor has shown her that life is short and full of unexpected horrors. How do you think the trauma she's seen in her career affects the choices she makes early in her relationship with Austin? And I think Alexis' experience as a trauma doctor makes her unafraid of obstacles. She attacks problems head on, and that explains her attraction to Austin. She had met Austin as a patient-doctor relationship. When they first met, Alexis operated on his arm to remove a bullet wound, and I think she was intrigued by him and the mystery around him. Like, why was he shot? Or what is the trouble that surrounds him? So I think she was intrigued by like this bad boy motion. And if you can't see me, I'm using air quotations. But once Austin disappears, Alexis faces this obstacle head on and wanted to discover the mystery behind his disappearance. Next question. The Vietnam that Alexis experiences on the bike trip is full of natural beauty and thriving cities, but references are made often to the destruction that the country faced during the war. How do events of the Vietnam War loom over the action of the book, despite it being set in the present? Have you ever traveled somewhere that felt deeply immersed in the past? So the setting is important to the story because Austin uses the Vietnam War as an excuse why he wanted to travel there for a vacation. It wasn't so much a vacation, but as a bike tour and nostalgia. According to Austin, his father and uncle fought in the Vietnam War, but this turns out to be a lie. But read more to find out how Alexis finds this out. If you have listened to other podcast episodes or booktube episodes, or even in this episode, I've mentioned Italy quite a few times, but I was definitely immersed in its culture and history both times. And I've just been immersed in that since I was dating and visiting archaeologists, and that made a difference. And going out with my family, I got to see a different part of Italy, and that made a difference and just like brought me back to history and really treasuring their culture. So yes, I have. The third question, Ken Serafian connects personally to different aspects of Austin's murder. He's a Vietnam vet and his daughter was the same age as Alexis. Do you think these personal connections help or hinder him more as he moves through the investigation? And I think these connections help Ken move through the investigation. With these connections, Ken has more skin in the game and more interest in the events that unfurl due to having personal connections. He can really question Austin's motives of why he wanted to go to Vietnam. And he has a daughter around Alexis' age, so he can really relate to her and sympathize with her, and probably feels like a father figure to Alexis and wants to help her out. But that is the Red Lotus. If you wanted to cover again, here it is. And this is on my website as well, lexisbooknook.com, if you want to buy your own copy. We have 2 left. The next one is the Magnolia Palace. I'm going to pull up that script as well. This was another interesting read. It is another historical fiction. So here is the cover for it. Very pretty. And it's like almost in brand new condition. So in the Magnolia Palace, the Henry Clay Frick house is the historical setting of majority of the book. The characters are based on actual historical figures to explore the mysteries surrounding Frick's death. The novel begins in 1919 in New York City, where 21-year-old Lillian Carter has just lost her mother to the Spanish flu. For the past several years, under the moniker Angelica, Lillian was one of the most sought-after artist models, with statues based on her figure gracing landmarks. But with her mother gone, Lillian is desperate. Her work has dried up, and a scandal has left her without a safe haven. So when she stumbles upon an employment opportunity at the Frick mansion, Lillian jumps at the chance. But the longer she works as a private secretary to the Frick's daughter, Helen, the more deeply her life gets entwined with the family, pulling her into a tangled web of romantic trysts, stolen jewel, a family drama that runs so deep that stakes have become life or death. About 50 years later, English model Veronica Weber has her own chance to make her career. She needs the money to support her family back at home to release her ill sister from the institution that she resides in. But when she is dismissed from the Vogue shoot, because she works as a model, it took place at the Frick house, and she is stuck in the snowstorm and blackout with charming intern/budding curator named Joshua. Veronica chances upon a series of hidden messages in the museum, which will lead her on a hunt that could not only save Veronica's financial struggles, but also reveal the truth about a decades-old murder of the infamous Frick family. Woo-hoo. So my thoughts, and I just said, like, this is historical fiction, and I love this genre so much, but I didn't know it was based on true events until I hit something that slightly connects me to the story. My great-grandparents were immigrants from Italy. They immigrated to Pennsylvania many years ago and decided to live in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Henry Clay Frick may have been the reason that the dam in Johnstown burst, killing hundreds of innocent people. In many history books, this is referred to as the Flood of Johnstown. Clay was the chairman of the Carnegie Steel Company and played a major role in the formation of the giant U.S. steel manufacturing concern, so it may have been his fault for his negligence in not making the repairs needed for the dam. He may have killed some of my relatives, to be honest. I don't know. I have a very large Italian family, so it's a very highly possibility. But when I told my grandma about this fact, she instantly wanted to read this book, so I'm saving this for her because it's her parents that have moved to Johnstown. But overall, the novel had me gripped to the story. It was very fascinating. I couldn't get my head out of the book and had trouble adjusting to reality since I was reading it so much. But I also liked it was during the Gilded Age, and I think that's like a very bright and shiny time for New York. But I really liked it. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. In the first question, in this captivating story, one will uncover the inherent worth of beauty, the extravagances of great wealth, and an enigmatic death shrouded with secrets. Out of these 3, which one do you think is the most intriguing and forms a large part of the novel's plot? And I think this is a hard question to answer. All these topics encapsulated so much of the story that it's hard to pick one. Of the 3 of them, in my opinion, the inherent worth of beauty may have formed the largest part of the novel's plot. I say that because we have 2 models as the protagonists, and their worth is more than their occupation. Lillian and Veronica are more than just a pretty face. They surprise the people surrounding them with their intelligence, good memory, and observations. Aside from the models, beauty surrounds the story in the form of art in the Frick house. There is art in every room of the house, and they are discussed at length in both the early 1900s and the mid-1900s in both timelines. In the second question, Veronica is fired from her shoots when she raises her voice against the inhuman working conditions for the workers. Do you think it was a brave thing to do? How can we, as readers, learn from Veronica's character as it pertains to standing up against injustice? And I think this is a very brave thing for Veronica to do, to stand up to her boss, because it could have been foolish and reckless since women of that age were not supposed to have a voice in their occupation or in their well-being. But instead, they were expected to obey their boss without question and fulfill their roles and responsibilities without question, or else be fired. Nowadays, it's the right thing to do, to stand up against injustice. In more recent times, more and more people are becoming better advocates for themselves and the people around them. And not only that, but for people who don't have a voice, like the ones who are ill, like Polly, Veronica's sister, or people from around the world. But we can learn to be careful, word ourselves correctly and appropriately, and to learn to speak up to the people most connected to or are the source of the problem. And in the last question, with a shared passion for art and an unwavering ambition to make it in the entertainment industry, Lillian and Veronica find themselves on a remarkable journey that take them to unforeseen places with extraordinary people. The death of a loved one in both cases adds to the complexity of their individual stories. How do you think this tragedy brought forth a change in their lives? Also, have you ever lost someone you love? If yes, how did it affect you? Tragedy has made Veronica and Lillian more personable. It adds depth to their character and more likable. I think it also adds more of a story behind Lillian's fate to her modeling downfall and the reason why she came to be at the Frick House and accidentally hired as a private secretary. As for Veronica, modeling is a means to an end for her. It has become a way for her to earn money to take care of her ill sister. If Polly were well, I don't think that Veronica would have been in the modeling business. But as for me, I've lost several people that I love. The most impactful one was my pop-pop. He and my grandma helped take care of me when my parents were both working in the office, which was like years and years ago, even before COVID. So they traveled a lot. My pop-pop is the reason I love reading. He taught me how to read, tie my shoes, wink, and whistle. I think about him often. He also died the year I got spinal fusion. I had surgery on my back for scoliosis when I was only 12 years old. So that was an impactful year for me. When I was struggling to pass the registered dietitian exam, I dreamt of him a lot. When my dreams at my most vivid, my pop-up would come to me and comfort me. And after one particularly vivid dream, the next time I took the RD exam, I passed, and I know my pop-up was looking after me in heaven. So he's been very impactful for me. I lost him in 2006, and I still think about him. But after that tough little review, we're done with the Magnolia Palace. We're going to be off to our last book, which I actually just finished last night, so it was perfect timing. So the last one is Killers of the Flower Moon. So actually, I wanted to read a little blurb about why they called it Killers of the Flower Moon. So, in May, when coyotes howl beneath an unnervingly large moon, taller plants such as spiderworts and black-eyed Susies begin to creep over the tinier blooms, stealing their light and water. The necks of the smaller flowers break and their petals flutter away, and before long they are buried underground. This is why the Osage Indians refer to May as the time of the flower killing moon. So this was really perfect. I didn't even plan on this book for May. I mean, I did because it had flower in the title, but this really solidified it. And that was in the opening of this book. But we'll go into the summary. Killers of the Flower Moon is about a shocking series of crimes in which dozens of Osage Indians were murdered in cold blood. Based on years of research and startling new evidence, this book investigates a series of sinister secrets and reversals. But more than that, it's about a searing indictment of the callousness and prejudice towards American Indians that allowed the murderers to operate with impunity for so long. This tells the story of the brutal murders behind white settlers' attempted disposition of an Osage family's Oklahoma lands, under which lay some of the world's most valuable oil fields. That his conspiracy of theft, terror, and genocide helped launch J. Edgar Hoover's FBI deepens the narrative's moral complexity. Structured out as a noir, that's the word, researched like an indictment and written with hard-boiled empathy, the book leaves us to wonder at the unresolved and unrecorded crimes against Native Americans. So, I thought this book was interesting, since because I didn't know anything about the Osage Indians, nor that a huge population of them mysteriously died in early 1900s. I had thought that there was some family drama that might have led to these murders, but it's a hatred of Indians by whites and their pursuit of power and money that belonged to the Osage Indians. The stories were outrageous and cruel. It was emotional, but it was also an eye-opening read. I learned a lot not only about Native American history, but also about the formation of the FBI. Being a crime junkie, I liked this book. I also liked how the author added dialogue and some descriptions to make it more of like a novel or a story. However, I did not love it. I think I would give it 3.5 stars out of 5. I do recommend this book though, especially for school teachers, for their students, crime junkies like me, and for book clubs. I think it would bring about good conversations, but I think it might be a sensitive book for those who have Native American heritage and might take this a little more sensitive than other readers. But why do you think these murders were forgotten? So, very quick answer. The murders were forgotten because they were covered up so that white people could inherit their valuable oil rights and get their money. They wanted to be rich and they wanted to take that away from the Osage Indians. Second question. The Osage came to Oklahoma expecting to be left alone. But then after the discovery of oil on their land, they became extremely wealthy and a target. In addition, the government installed a racist system, not allowing the Osage to spend their own money. Let's talk about the ways the Osage tribe failed and how they weren't protected at all from what was to come. But the Osage were never protected, and I did a little bit more research outside of the book for this. But during the Depression, the Osage didn't receive their full annuity in cash like other Native Americans, likely due to the racism. The Osage suffered from the government's failure to provide full or satisfactory rations and goods during this period. Middlemen made profits by shorting supplies to the Indians or giving them poor quality food. Many people starved. Many of them suffered during the winters because they weren't really well protected. So they adjusted. And when the government failed to supply them, outlaws often smuggled whiskey to the Osage and the Pawnee people. So they were never really truly protected. But going into this oil part of it, there's some history of that, but I won't go into that because I don't want to bore you. But if you're really interested in learning about it, it's in the book. But during the 1920s and the current times that took place in the book, the Osage Indians were in a period called the Reign of Terror. They suffered from manipulation, fraud, and numerous murders by outsiders eager to take over their wealth. The main way they failed is due to the mismanagement of their oil funds. Long story short, they just couldn't well manage it. And the last question, why do you think William Hale had such an influence on the town and the larger community? William Hale was an American cattleman and convicted murderer of several Osage Indians. He was a prominent figure on the Osage Indian Reservation, in which was then the Indian Territory, where he built the Hale Ranch and made a fortune raising cattle. He had immense power, which made people fear him. He rose to local prominence through years of bribery, extortion, and intimidation. In 1921, he ordered the murders of his nephew's wife's sister and mother, followed by her cousin, another sister, and brother-in-law in order to gain control of their oil rights. So he was just a downright dirty man, and there is their story. I did forget to go over the Dictionary of Lost Words, so I'm going to do that real quick, and then we'll end this episode. In the Dictionary of Lost Words, a fictional story from the first-person perspective, it centers around Esme Nicole, who spends most of her life around or directly working on the production of the Oxford English Dictionary. Esme lost her mother and had no real memory of her. She was raised by her father, who is a lexicographer. I think I said that right. A person who compiles dictionaries working on the Oxford version. The story is based on true historical events surrounding the compilation of the OED, or the Oxford English Dictionary, the suffrage movement for women's voting rights in World War I. So, I don't know how many people were interested in that, but I wasn't. I thought it was really boring, and I've never found a Reese book, like a Reese's book club pick, to be so boring, but the synopsis and story were just like a yawn fest to me. I just thought it was so boring, and I like historical fiction, but I found this story to be so dry, and it couldn't hold my attention. Despite the interesting topics, the story couldn't hold my focus on it, so I gave this book a 1 out of 5. Yikes. Okay, first question. Some words are more important than others. I learned this growing up in the scriptorium, but it took me a long time to understand why. Do you agree with this statement? Why are some words more important than others? Or is that even true? I don't agree with this statement. I think all words are important and should be chosen for the right time and place, or the appropriate conversation. All words are created differently and should be used for certain situations. This is where like nouns, verbs, and adverbs come into play, etc., etc. I believe that there are strong connotations and meanings behind them. Like, for example, love and hate are strong words to add to descriptions, and they should be chosen for the appropriate conversation. Second question. Many of the negative or meh reviews of the book complain about the pacing, particularly at the beginning. How did you find the pacing? So I found this question. I did not make this up. So I am glad I'm not the only one that found this so meh in their words. But I am one of those negative meh reviewers. The beginning was very slow and it lasted for maybe the whole duration of the book. But one of the many reasons why I give this book a negative rating is because of the slow pacing. And the last question, in the author's note, Williams says that the book begins as two simple questions. Do words mean different things to men and women? And if they do, is it possible that we have lost something in the process of defining them? How do you answer those questions? So I think men use words differently than women. For instance, I think men use like cuss and swear words more often than women, and they use them as descriptors, which is like, in my opinion, very unintelligible. And I think they tend to normalize it. From a woman's perspective, I think that women take words a little more seriously. We tend to use stronger words at more appropriate times, whereas men use them more freely without thinking. And in a nutshell, I think they think before they speak. They speak before they think. That's it. But that is the Dictionary of Lost Words. I'm sorry I squeezed that in at the last minute. But all of these books are on my website on lexisbooknook.com, so you can buy your own copy. And again, like I'll make a commission based off your sale, but it's at no extra cost to you. I also have these summaries and my thoughts on my website as well. It's my little book blog website. Check that out. Check out my Instagram, Lexi's Book Nook. I will have more episodes like this for June. I will have an episode soon for the beginning of June of all the books I'll be reading. And if you want to support the podcast, it is only $3 a month to see my face, my book nook, the covers, get inspiration for your own book nook. Only for $3 a month. You can also have the option of Bookstagram, which is all those same benefits plus some bonus episodes. So you have a plethora of options, but I really hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you keep on reading.